Welcome to Revolution Against Evolution. I'm your host, Doug Sharp.
Your co-host, Rich Gear here as well, and Doug's got an interesting topic. I'm going to let him take point on this one, though. Glaciers, mammoths, and mastodons. But I do love the subject, mastodons and mammoths, especially Michigan. It's kind of a big deal here in Michigan.
Yeah, one of the things I just got back from northern Michigan, where we had spent a week of vacation. And so I was able to spend some time in a place called the Glacial Hills Pathway and Natural Area.
And where is that?
And this is in Antrim County, near the town of Bel Air. And if you...
I'm still lost.
Well, the big landmark there is Torch Lake.
Okay.
Torch Lake.
I've never been there, so I'm not really sure where that is. Yeah.
You have the east and west arm of the Grand Traverse Bay.
Okay, so you're up in the northwest and the Lower Peninsula.
Yeah, and the little finger of the Lower Peninsula.
Little finger, I got you. Now I get the idea.
And so you have Leelanau Colony, which is the little
I know
finger.
Where that is.
Then there's the east and west arm of the Grand Traverse Bay. And then you have Torch Lake, Elk Lake, Lake Skegomog.
I know Elk Lake, but Skegomog, nope, I don't know that one.
And then there's Lake Bel Air, which is near the town of Bel Air, and we were at Shanty Creek, which is where they have all these golf courses. And and there's right next to where we were at was the Legend Golf Course, which was built by, I think it was Arnold Palmer who built that.
Oh, serious, really?
And so it is really a legend in terms of beauty. And it takes advantage of the glacial topography that is left up there.
Talking about the golf courses?
The golf courses.
Okay.
Because in the legend, the first hole, it just goes down this big pit of a valley, and it starts out at the top with a nice par 5
Par 5?
There's a par 5 hole that goes down this valley and just looks like it goes down there forever. And but it's a thing of beauty, and then it winds its way through the woods. Each hole goes in through the woods, and so you have lots of places to get your ball lost.
Okay. Yeah, okay, all right.
And so I probably would not do well on that particular golf course, but and then it comes out over on the other side of the.
Well, you don't golf much anyway, do you?
Well, no.
I'm terrible. I'm the worst golfer on the planet.
I was having trouble with a little windmill this weekend.
Oh.
And the one that goes loop to loop.
Yeah. When I go on a regular golf course, I'll have 20 what they call worm burners right in a row. And basically, it's just a little. You hit it, and it goes. You look it up, and it's on the ground going like this. And then I get this great shot off, and I go, okay, what do I do? Let me try to do that again. No, 20 more worm burners. That's what I get. I'm horrible. I'm not a good golfer at all. But anyway, so it's a beautiful place. And what does this have to do with glaciers? Obviously, it must be that formed, the glacial action must have formed a lot of this topography. Is that?
Well, there's a lot of things that, when I was taking geomorphology and geology, and when I was going through college, they taught you a lot of these different terms of what the glaciers left behind. Mm-hmm. And of course, they always talk about it in terms of, well, it was like 14,000 to 10,000 years ago when the glaciers came and the ice.
That's pretty much Michigan. That's what they always. Yeah, you're right.
And then then you had mammoths and mastodons that showed up maybe a little bit afterwards or something like that. I don't think that they really know whether the mammoths and mastodons preceded the Ice Age or if they came afterwards.
And I always grew up with the mammoths because they were all hairy mammoth, woolly mammoths, because they went through the ice age. These great pictures growing up, you know, the mammoths going through these ice storms. But the reality is they ate pretty much like not
semi-tropical,
but,
yeah.
but it's vegetation. They would not live in a ice age climate at all, pretty much. But they got that name because they had hair on them, or they call it woolly mammoths a lot of times. But a lot of them were found in these glaciers, and you know the very famous mammoths that are frozen, but they were like frozen tundra type stuff. It was like water.
Yeah, they keep finding unfossilized mammoths and mastodons in Siberia and in up in the northern parts of Canada, and like the actual Heidelberg Island up in the...
Where it's still frozen. Yeah, you don't find anything that down here. Obviously, all the ice age, all the glacial action in glaciers and the frozen stuff all melted away long ago. So anything that might have been unfossilized is pretty much either been rotted or eaten by wolves or whatever. So we don't have any of that stuff.
And you know, when we... I've been leading some of the kids through the museum where Rich works, and they talk about the mammoths and mastodons, and they usually come up and ask, what about dinosaurs? Did the dinosaurs exist in Michigan? And I have to tell them, no, not that we know of.
We've never found a dinosaur in Michigan that I know of. No, if there is one, correct us, but I've never heard of one. Mammoths and mastodons. In fact, for a long time, I wasn't sure if mammoths were in Michigan, but recently they just discovered one in southern Michigan.
Right, in the Chelsea area, right?
Where was it?
It was in Chelsea.
Yeah, that's right, the Chelsea area. And but I always knew mastodons. And it's interesting because the display we have at work is pretty good because they have like the different tooth structure. They're very different. They're elephant type animals, but they have a lot of distinctions that are pretty neat. Like obviously the mammoth, it's got this little bump on the thing in its head, and the way its tusks kind of look at, and the way shape of its body, but its teeth are entirely different than on mastodons.
Yeah.
They would have maybe eaten. They surmise they might have eaten different kinds of plant fibers and things, and it makes sense to me. I don't have any issues really with that part of it.
Well, we really don't know.
And we don't know, absolutely.
You can take the teeth in your
can
mouth.
See the frozen ones, you can see the kind of vegetation that's still left in their stomach. So we do have some of that stuff. So that we have a lot better evidence for that kind of eating.
But the whole idea is that there is a flood model for the Ice Age.
Correct.
And
it's brilliant.
And Michael Ord is really the biggest promoter.
He's the Ice Age guy.
And he's a weather guy. He knows climatology. And
but I call him Mr. Ice Age because he's done so much. He's written several books on the topic. He's written a lot of articles. And but it's about weather. He's actually a meteorologist or what?
No, that's what he does. Is a meteorologist.
Yeah.
And David Vonderheid's the same way. He's a meteorologist, but they understand how weather works and how weather has the potential to shape landforms. And the glacial geology is interesting in that you can see evidence of it up north because these lakes, Torch Lake and the east and west arm of Grand Traverse Bay, are gouges made from the glaciers. And it is possible that a lot of the erosion that took place at the time that the glaciers were melting. And the flood model, what it is talking about is that you have a time right after the flood where you have warm oceans even at the poles.
Yes, right.
And that's because of the heating that volcanic activity made the oceans pretty warm, and that affected the climate in the area. And so the ice would have been at the spot where further inland from the oceans. You'd have the warm oceans having all that moisture
And
piling
then you
up.
got cool, and you have cool land mass. The land is cooling on. It's getting quite cold, and warm oceans causing a snow engine. Is that really is what they
Right,
call it?
and, the Bible talks about after the flood there was a great wind that helped to dry out the land.
Right. Yep.
And you would have, if you take a look at some of the weather patterns that would have taken place, Larry Vardaman talked about hypercanes, big
Big hurricanes, like gigantic ones. Yeah. Yep.
And through all that, though, you had in the Middle East where Noah and his ark landed, there had been protection from a lot of the devastation that took place.
I mean, when I was growing up, again, I had the myth, and I think a lot of people get thinking the whole world was covered in ice and snow, and that's not the case.
Right.
In fact, the ice age here, it went to Michigan and down to, I'm not sure if it got to southern Ohio, but it got into Ohio, and that's about the extent of it. You get lower down than that, and it's fairly temperate.
Right.
It's fairly nice. In fact, I imagine Arizona and those places might have been quite nice back in post ice age. It might have been fairly nice and temperate and good. And there are places they talk about, like, I don't know whether this is related, Doug. You could maybe know better.
Well, the Sahara Desert.
Like I would say, the Egyptian area would have been very, very fertile and wonderful. And right now, the only thing got really nice there is right along the Nile River, which
And
is
you
still,
had the Fertile Crescent.
Yep, and the Fertile Crescent
where
Tower of Babel and
Israel and
Yep.
and that isn't as fertile now,
it's not as nice
except
now.
for the fact that they do irrigation.
Yeah, Eric Von Fange, a guy we've had on our show, great guy. He's passed away since then, but he talked about the great desiccation that happened. It was like very temperate, and then everything was drying out, and a lot of the deserts began to rise up about this. And you're talking probably the Mosaic time period, right around that period when that was starting to happen. But the flood is about what 2300 BC. We're give or take a few years here and there, but to about and then you talk about the ice age would have been probably maybe slightly after that, 100 years after that. To maybe
Michael, or it says it's probably 400 to 700 years in the duration.
Yeah, that's about it.
Because right at the time, right after the flood, there would have been all this readjusting that took place because of the
a lot of seismic activity and
weather patterns that took place after the flood, that as the earth settled back into its state. And we believe that at the time that the flood occurred, there was probably a situation where where the continent split, and there's still some creationists that think it was at the time of Peleg, but
that's not too many. But there's a few holdouts. We've talked about that before. I mean, Peleg does mean earthquake, or quake, or division. I tend to think it's primarily the language division, but I'm not against the fact that it might have been a local earthquake.
Right. Yeah.
Especially we're talking about post-flood action. There was a lot of seismic activity, and earthquakes are used. The Lord has used earthquakes in the past as a sign of judgment. So that the Tower of Babel in the Mesopotamian area could have had an earthquake. Quite possible, but it's not of the extent of the worldwide. People talk about that would have caused a worldwide flood of the likes of Noah's flood. I always think it's amazing, Doug, how many people they'll have a pre-Noahian flood, which the Bible doesn't even talk about, to try to get that Genesis 1, 1, and 2. We have millions of years of history in there, and they'll make this big flood. In Noah's flood, they make this local flood, or this almost, and then the other one, that post after that, they'll make the Peleg one, will make that into a major flood of the epic of. There's only one really Noah's flood. There's one, and he said he'd never flood the world like that ever again. And apparently he never had done anything like that before that. And so that caused a lot of things going on. Like you say, the Ice Age is part of that.
Yeah, the secular geologists want to make out that there's a whole bunch of different ice
They got up to 40 of them now. I remember when I was growing up, it was 4. Well, actually it was 1, and then it got up to 4. And now I've heard like, what, up to 40 of them? There's a bunch of them. And it goes like 100,000 years ago to 10,000 years.
Yeah.
And that 10,000 years is really, when you read, I did a thing on the post-flood, the post-flood world, and remember that time in South Africa when we were talking about that, the Babel era, and you realize there's a lot of stuff out there. We're not going to talk about this much tonight, but it fascinates the heck out of me. All along the coastlines, or all around the world, you find buried underwater, not buried, but underwater like cities or remnants of cities with architecture very similar to Stonehenge, Egyptian pyramidic type structures, all around. And every time they find one of these, you find the new lost city of Atlantis. There's always a new lost city of Atlantis. They're finding a lot. It's generally on the coastline. Who's the guy that did that book? I always forget. The Ice Age Civilizations. It was a really, well, it really got my mind thinking about that. But it's interesting that most of these civilizations are on the coastlines, and they're about 300 feet below sea level. Mm-hmm. But by the time of the post-flood during the Ice Age, they would have been above ground. They would have been on top of the surface. As the water, as the land masses begin to rise up in certain area, but then the water began to melt, and it was covering these things. So they're about 250 to 350 feet, and that's where all these civilizations are found. It's kind of interesting.
No, Michael Ord is quite a bit into the idea of vertical tectonics, which means that the land shifted quite a bit up and down.
Yeah, talk about that, because I don't really understand that very well. Well, I've heard you talk about it, and he's talked about it.
The one thing is that the ocean basins are basically basalt.
Basically basalt.
Basically basalt. Yeah.
That rolls trippingly off the tongue. Anyway, that's true. Yeah.
And that's a volcanic type of material that would have issued out of that mid-Atlantic ridge, and that was heavier, and it was probably like this, and there was enough to make that whole part of that continent that was there sink to become the ocean basin.
Oh,
and
really?
So then he believes that the other ones, the continents like North America, were buoyed up because of
pushed upward. There's a weight down here. Well, that sounds. It almost reminds you the mountains rose up and the valleys sank down.
Exactly. You have scriptural support for that idea.
Yeah.
Now, of course, we can't rewind time and go back and observe scientifically what might have happened.
We did a time machine. Giving us a 1984 DeLorean. My bad Christopher Lloyd imitation,
Oh dear, yeah.
I don't know if we wanted to go back in a time machine that far. Might have been too scary, man. Imagine if you went back during the time of the worldwide flood.
Oh yeah.
That might not have been a good idea. Okay.
Not a good plan at all.
Not a good plan at all.
No. Noah must have had been the man of faith to live through that, and
he had limited options.
He did, yes. And go and build a boat, and otherwise you're not going to float.
Build a boat, or you don't float. Yep.
So, in northern Michigan, I could observe all this evidence for glaciers.
Were they moraines?
Yeah, they're
glacial moraine.
In the glacial hills. I actually hiked up the side of a drumlin. A drumlin is a teardrop-shaped hill. That's pretty steep-sided. Okay. And it's where a lot of the sediment is left, and then it's actually eroded about over area that's a little bit harder than the rest of the area, and so the sides would have been eroded away, but it would have left this teardrop-shaped.
So it's harder material. Is that what it is?
Probably that's what anything like maybe a big rocky area might have caused a drumlin. An esker is where the sediment accumulates in a glacier as it goes down the stream.
Okay.
There's on the glacier there would have been a stream of water that would have, as the glacier melts, it would have accumulated the sediment and deposited in this in this area. So you can actually walk on these eskers, and they're long. It looks like a riverbed, but it's actually an elevated riverbed because the rest of the area
I see what you're saying. Okay.
was full of ice. Then you have kettles. The kettles are a deep chasm, and this is what the legend was: is a kettle where there was a block of ice sitting in this area, and then the sediment built up around this block of ice. Then the ice melts and it leaves this chasm.
Oh, really? Okay.
And a lot of the lakes in that area are kettle lakes. They are, they're really steep in terms of the size.
Which lakes would be those?
Torch Lake is a little bit different because it's a longer lake. But I remember up in northern Michigan where we used to have a cabin. There's a place called McCormick Lake. Well, that was a kettle lake, and that was by Elmer's Pond.
Are those like general lakes pretty cold?
They are. They're great trout fishing lakes.
Okay.
But they and down in the Irish Hills, there's and in about Chelsea area in the Gerald E. Eddy glacial park that's down there. There's a kettle lake that's actually getting filled in with sediment. It's sort of collapsing on the sides, then you get a lot of swampy materials where it actually grows over the top of the lake.
Okay.
And
some of that stuff indicates to me this did not happen that long ago anyway, because it seemed like a lot more of those deep-sided lakes would have been filled in by over the
well, that's what I see is that it wouldn't take long for a kettle lake to become all that little steep size to just
kind of start, granted, it's still, you're still talking 3,000-4,000 years, but you're not talking minimum of 10 and sometimes 15, 16, 17. In Michigan, in general, we never get past. They talk about 14,000 years ago. I don't even.
Now you know where that comes from, and that gets to my point. Is that we have a date problem, and that was caused by a little bit of an error that Mr. Lyell made back when he was measuring the rate of erosion of Niagara Falls. He figured, well, it's eroding back at 4 feet a year. And so if you calculate how long this chasm had been forming, well, we could know then that this chasm took 11,000 years to form. And so then he extrapolated, well, then the ice age would have been 14,000
3,000 or 4,000 years earlier. Yeah.
And so this is what's stuck in the minds of everybody, is the Niagara Escarpment was a glacial moraine, and this would have been something that eroded back.
What was the real rate of erosion? It seemed like it was a lot faster than that. They had to shore it up about, 20 years ago, 30 years ago? With cement, because the Niagara Falls was eroding away so fast, it would have been gone. And, I don't know, it might have been gone less than 50 to 100 years. It would have been no longer Niagara Falls as we know it. It was eroding so fast. And you could even see from when Lyell was looking at it, how fast it eroded from that time to today.
Now, what we do have is the records that Father Hennepin had put forth, and he actually made a drawing of what he saw Niagara Falls was in 1677 when he first visited it. And you can tell that the erosion rate had been much faster because you had where the Horseshoe Falls is. There was no horseshoe. there was just a little bit of...
Was it straight? Or?
Yeah, it was pretty much almost straight across to where you had the American Falls, a little part of Goat Island, and then the horseshoe. The part of the
yeah,
Horseshoe
I see what you're
Falls.
saying, yeah.
And so that really indicates that, if Father Hennepin had actually made somewhat of an accurate depiction of what he saw, then you would have been, you could see that it would, the rate of erosion that IL thought did not work in a uniformitarian
And based upon
manner.
the erosion we have documented since Lyell's time,
Right.
we could see that Hennepin's drawing might have been probably pretty accurate. So
Right, yeah,
the
yeah.
erosion was a lot faster. So anyway, but still, even Doug, it reminds me of so many theories like that so many things that they use it was based on a misconception.
Mm-hmm.
For instance, this is a biblical thing. The JEPD theory that is so vaunted in Bible colleges, and it's based on a bad piece of information, i.e. Moses didn't have, writing had not evolved in Moses' day to that advanced of a state, so these documents are written much later. Well, they've proven that long since, from the Ebla tablets to Sumerian writing, everything else, Code of Hammurabi, but they still hold on to the idea of the four documents, the documentary hypothesis, even though it's based on a bad piece of information. This Lyell thing seems to be very similar. They started with this premise, and they've held on to this 14,000. That's what we teach. That's what we have in a museum. Same thing. 14,000 years. And I don't buy it either.
Yeah, and it's too bad that we can't go back and reevaluate some of the things that we teach in our schools, because it's
well, at least let us know that this was based on erroneous information to start with.
Right.
No sense of holding on. But we can observe in the present the beautiful golf courses and the beautiful moraine.
Right.
Yeah, you didn't talk about what a moraine was, Doug. You got everything else, but what is it?
Well, a moraine is sort of like the edge of where the glacier stopped.
Okay.
And so it would continue to pile sediment into like a hill. And there's a moraine that goes all the way across Michigan. And if you go north of Clare, there's a big hill that you go up.
Oh.
And that particular hill is a glacial moraine.
Okay.
And it's sort of like the gateway to the north. When you go up this hill, down below the hill is all this farmland.
Oh.
Go up the hill, you now have the sandy, loamy soil that the trees like, and so that becomes the upper north, and that really gives you and there's a place called Man Sighting Road that as you go up over that hill.
Oh, yeah, I remember that. Yeah.
Man Sighting Road, and Mr. Man had a sighting. The sighting was where you dumped the logs into the river.
Okay. Is that what it's called? That?
Yep.
He has a font of just useless trivial information, which I love. Where he comes up with this stuff, I never even think about it. So it's called a sighting.
Yeah, that's called a sighting. Yeah.
Okay.
So
his name was Man.
yeah, he was the man. Well, we hope you enjoyed our little journey into glacial geology. We'll see you next time on Revolution Against Evolution.